Welcome to Turn a Page, the official comic book club for Nerd Initiative. Each week, the NI Bullpen will be covering the world of comics, talking to creators, deep diving into some fantastic stories, and much more. Now let's hand it over to the team and turn a page.
Welcome to a very special edition of Turn a Page, the official comic book club for Nerd Initiative. My name is Ken M. You know me as the host of the ODPH podcast. I'm also Nerd Initiative Editor-in-Chief. On the screen, it is in his contract. He has to do his own intro.
Coming at you live and direct straight from the Sanctum of Awesome. My name's Off the Cuff Tom, Nerd Initiative's pop culture connoisseur. Ken, Matt, always a pleasure.
Absolutely. And when we say we have a special guest, we absolutely mean it. And there is a big movement going on in comics. A brand new publisher is taking the scene by storm, and it is going to be one that you want to get very, very familiar with because they have a wide array of stories that you want to add to your collection. And we're fortunate enough to have the publisher and founder of this new imprint on the line with us. Now, his resume covers everything from 311, Rolling Loud, the NFL. I don't even know if there's anything he hasn't done yet, but you might know him best as the former CEO of Heavy Metal Magazine, but now he has taken the wheels and taken your entertainment to the land of GUNGNIR. Please give a warm welcome
guys?
to the one and only Matthew Medney. Matt, what is going on?
How you guys doing? I'm excited to be here. I appreciate that intro. For everyone listening, I'm definitely paying him after for that.
Oh, no problem. And I was like, I got so hyped up. I was like, Matthew Medney. I was saying medley because like this is like a music when you hear it to your ears coming from the stories that you're telling us here at GUNGNIR. So why don't
we get paid? Hold on a second.
We will talk behind the scenes about that one. But first and foremost, we have to talk about GUNGNIR. So Matthew, how did this whole imprint come to be?
You know, when I left heavy metal in, I guess it would have been January of 2023, I had thought to myself if I wanted to stay doing publishing, get more just into animation and this, that, and the other thing. And I realized that books and the medium, the crucible of storytelling, which is really what I think books are, was really important to me. And I didn't want to give up that aspect of my soul, basically. And I didn't really like the thought of creating pitches that I then have to sell to other people. I'm definitely more of the type of person that's like, let me put together a group of creatives that I really trust and let us be our own war room and then create the things that we think really resonate and then see if that sells in the market. And that's what we were able to do with Steve Orlando and Jim Kruger. And Steve, I've known from times at Heavy Metal. We had worked together on a couple of books, Starward, and he had written a bunch of other shorts for the magazine. And then Jim and I sort of went through the crucible of the Steve Aoki book, Hero Quest. Before GUNGNIR was a publisher, I'd been brought in to help produce that book, and Jim was writing it. And we put together what ended up being 100 pages of graphic novel, 300 total pages of a book in 100 days. We contracted about 35 artists, and we managed that flow from, Steve's brain to Steve and Jim writing it to me bringing that to life with the art. And as Jim and I always like to say, when you spend 100 days putting together a 300-page book, you either come out of it hating each other or as blood brothers. And at the end of it,
that's a great analogy.
And at the end of it, I had already started putting together ideas for what GUNGNIR would be. And I brought it to Jim and I was like, Steve doesn't want to be the editor-in-chief. He really likes the role and idea of an executive editor, really focusing just on the creative. And we have this, this gap for an editor-in-chief. And I think the three of us as a team is really powerful. And he loved it. And we've been sort of building that ever since. And, GUNGNIR, just for your audience that may or may not know, is the staff of Odin. And a lot of people, obviously know Odin as like a god of war and the god of Valhalla and Norse mythology, but he's also the god of poetry. And in the Norse lore, his staff, GUNGNIR, never misses its mark when Odin shoots it. So the allegory was that the god of poetry always hits his mark. And that's what we were always trying to sort of come out with, because for us, some publishers have a house style of art. Some publishers have a house style of storytelling. We're doing art books, we're doing graphic novels, we're doing prose novels. We just don't do single issues where we do more completed stories. But our sort of through line is that every story we tell in whatever genre it may be has to pose a question that two friends, two enemies, two family members, which might even be worse than enemies, can debate on a Friday night after they finish the story. That to us is the pull through, is that we're posing questions wrapped in awesome adventures. And whether that's in science fiction, whether that's in fantasy, whether that's in drama, whatever it may be, it's really about posing an ideological question wrapped in a great story and allowing you to decide if the topple really toppled.
I love that concept.
That's just amazing.
Yeah, like, because you never really think about that as a reader per se, but when you're now posing that question out loud, that is something that really, I think, opens up a lot of avenues for the audience to really kind of sink their teeth into.
And does that whole idea really tie into the, the mission statement of the right stories that deserve to be discovered?
Yeah, exactly. And, I come from the music business, like way before I got into writing, which about 10 years ago. I was a tour and production manager for a bunch of DJs, and we'd be on the road a lot. And, all entertainment, whether it's TV, film, whether it's literature, whether it's music and events, they all actually follow very similar trajectories within their own constructs. And publishers and event promoters are very similar in the trajectory of how it's evolved in the last 20, 30 years. Event promoters used to curate parties, and those parties would be branded. And then the DJs that would come play those parties were secondary to the atmosphere that that promoter had created for that party. And over the last 20 years, that sort of evolved into it being artist-driven events. And that's great. And I think that's really great for your top-tier artists. But that actually, and it might be counterintuitive to somebody to think that that's not the best way, but it's really not. Because what that means is that the artist that needs to be discovered to become that top-tier artist doesn't have a built-in what's called soft ticket venue for them to then go get discovered in. Publishing has followed a very similar path too, where it's now all about authors who will sell books without the publisher having to do much marketing on their own. We believe on our side of creating that publisher where, sure, you'll have those big brand name authors, and it's cool that we were able to get them and a book from them is coming out with us and there's a magic there. But our real goal is to be able to create a brand, an authenticity, and a promise so strong that when we announce a new book, you buy it not because you care who wrote it, but because you care, because you trust that what we're putting out is going to fulfill that urge that you have as to why you read, and then discover who the artist is, who the author is after, become a fan of theirs also, and be that vehicle where we can help promote new talent that doesn't have that platform, and then give legacy talent a home that they can do their weirdest, funnest, wildest ideas.
I can definitely relate to that. You can ask Ken. I usually do a lot of, the indie, publishers, or, just not the big two, let's be honest. So I've come to trust those particular companies, and to have that mindset coming out the gate with that is just a great way to try and, put yourself ahead in the market.
And especially too with how the indie scene is going right now. I mean, there is so much creativity out there that it's not so centered around the big two per se, but you can really go into a shop on a Wednesday and really find so many different stories, all told in a different fashion, all presented in a different way. And for a reader, that's got to be just so liberating to go in that it's not the same old same. We always want to go in and find something new, discover something new, and then really get the word of mouth behind it. And I think with a lot of stuff that we have at GUNGNIR, that's where you're going to be seeing a lot of that, because just going over a little bit of the list there, I really think that that's going to be one point that jumps out, and especially establishing the brand name, because when fans can really trust a publishing house and what they're doing, that's even, I think, one of the greatest cosigns you can do. Because if you know that this brand is putting out this, it's kind of like, with music, with a certain label was having an artist come out, and like, okay, well, that artist is under that banner. I know that that's good because they wouldn't have signed them otherwise. It's that kind of same vibe. And
Exactly.
I think that's very cool. Okay.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and I gotta say, I'm sure every guest says this to you, but your voice is so made for radio. It is uncanny. It's wild.
Thank you, thank you. I used to do it way back in the heyday, way back, but but much of my journey is gotten away from doing the commercial thing and just doing something that I'm very passionate about as I'm whacking microphones next to me. It's just one of those things that when you really can
That's
get
not a
behind-
euphemism.
No, I see what he did there. But regardless of that, is just one thing that when you can get passionate about something, it really resonates, and you can hear in the sound of the fans' voices when they're online and when they're not. It's one of these aspects of being a comic fan in this day and age that we're all searching for that. And with GUNGNIR, you're doing that. But especially like coming from your background at Heavy Metal Magazine, or yeah, you really had a lot of experience there. But what do you think has been the biggest challenge now going away from that established brand to now forming your own?
Yeah, I mean, each thing faces its own set of challenges, right? Heavy metal's biggest challenge was taking a legacy brand and pulling it into a culture that not necessarily was as amenable to what the original brand in the 70s and 80s was. And that in and of itself saw a lot of challenges. Creating a new brand, completely different set of challenges, which is, creating that initial spark. With heavy metal, to use the analogy, the lawnmower was already humming. I just had to decide how best to cut the grass. With starting a new brand, we have to rip that engine on before we can even decide which way we want to cut the grass. And that has been a lot of these podcasts, getting the word out. A lot of just understanding that your first titles are going to be doing better on backlist than they're going to be doing on sale. And that is, having that foresight, having that understanding, having that anticipation, I think is really important. And working with the retailers and the communities to try to get them to take a chance on your first books, because at the end of the day, the one thing that I know we have that I think stands toe to toe with anyone else is our books are triple A quality art, triple A quality stories, and they're all hardcover. I like to say I'm a big, I'm probably one of the biggest Tolkien fans you'll ever meet, and I'm a big believer in Ent rights. So if you're gonna burn down a tree, you might as well make the book beautiful, and it has to be hardcover, and it has to be, presented in a way that would do Treebeard proud, and that's sort of how we do it. All our books are hardcover. All of them come in like a custom box. I before we started the podcast, I found out that you guys hadn't gotten any of these, which I'm going to remedy after we do it. But all of our books come in like a custom GUNGNIR box, and they're all like really heavily branded. Really want it to feel like an experience. Sort of going back to what I was saying earlier about coming from the music business. People go to concerts 2, 3, 4 times and listen to the same songs performed by the same artist, not because they forget what that song sounded like, but because they want to find that feeling again that they had when they went. And I feel like you can recreate a similar feeling with publishing and with books. And, most people own a book, 99% of the time, for the life of the book they own it, it's an art piece, not a piece of literature. And we think about that in the production of our book. So the hardcover book, the heavy pages, the high gloss, our books are art pieces once you're done reading them. And we want you to put them on the shelf and make them proud and feel like they are part of the emotional construct that when you walk by your bookcase and you see it, you get a jolt of excitement remembering that experience of reading it. And to do that, it shouldn't be a flimsy paperback that like gets destroyed when you're reading it. It should be a nice piece of cardboard wrapped in amazing art that can stand the test of time.
Yeah, gimme, 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 gimme. I just wanted to put it on my shelf. I
But
mean,
that's what
I like collecting things, so to have a
We
book
all do,
like
right?
that,
I
yeah.
mean, like we're all collectors at the end of the day. So it's like, I want to really lean into that experience.
Yeah, and that's something too. It's such an important part of comics too is the collection. But I loved how you touched upon the making the memory aspect because that's what we all want as fans, and that's why you can always say about what was your first comic you got into. Oh, and you can always go back to that time and place when you picked that up and read it for the first time. So
Yeah.
that being said, what was your first comic you got into, Matt?
Um, I always get asked this question. I always forget which was the first. It's either Sandman or it's the Greg Hildebrandt run of Captain America.
Okay.
I can't remember which one came first. They came very similar timing. I know Hildebrandt was early 90s. I'm pretty sure Sandman was early 90s too. Um,
But the
and
dichotomy of Cap versus Sandman, that's just like,
well,
apples and oranges.
my two favorite stories though. I got my little Captain America tattoo
Oh,
here.
nice, nice.
And I was fortunate enough to be friends with Greg before he passed last year. For my time at Heavy Metal, we had done a bunch of stuff together, and was the coolest dude I ever met. And it was just awesome to see his take on it. But they're not really that different of stories if you think about it, right?
Mhm.
Captain America is about a weak individual whose heart of gold superseded everything else, and then when he was awarded abilities, sought to change the world for the better. Morpheus's view is, in spite of the world treating him like a mortal for 300 years, he still had the sensibility to not take anger out on people, but to observe and to act in the way of the ancestral plane that they all came from and observe and find death and all these other things. And they have a lot of similarities in moral compass. I think
Mhm.
one could argue stories
Yeah.
are very different, obviously.
Right, right, right. That's what I
Um,
was thinking.
but yeah, those two early, and then Saga was a big moment for me. Um, loved Saga. And then I think I read Umbrella Academy and A History of Violence, and I was like, wow, Vertigo is the shit.
Yeah.
And then it was
Yeah.
gone. Right after I was like, this is the best, it's gone.
Yeah, like, well, I mean, that's such a wide variety of books too, but that gives you a true idea though of like how far comics can reach and just how much they impact. Like I say, I'm right there with you. I'm a huge Cap fan too. I'll show you off air. I have my little statue over here, but it is one of those things like when it connects with you, it really has that influence, and that's what takes you now, especially when you go to the creative side of things, that you have that memory,
100%.
and now you want to establish that with a new audience.
Exactly. And yeah, I've always been a big fan that graphic novels weren't like capes, right? Obviously, capes are a big piece and a large part of the business. But to me, graphic novels and comics were always just 2D films,
Yeah.
right? And I always looked at it that way. And I think that it's starting to come around more and more today, where it's people realize that there's really nuanced storytelling that can happen in graphic novels, which is amazing. Watchmen, probably the most nuanced storytelling
Oh yeah.
done in graphic novel form. But I think it's one of the best mediums out there to explore ideas that you know are hard to do on screen, right? A thousand space, 100 spaceships in a panel is gonna cost the same to make as one spaceship. Whereas if you were to do the VFX of that, those are vastly different price
Yeah, I
points.
was gonna say, be a little bit difference there.
Now, because of your, background and, having your such a diverse uh, history in comic books yourself and trying to promote that here with Gungnir, what is it you're looking for in not only just the creators as far as those who are writing your scripts, but also your artists as well?
Yeah, great question. Totally diverse. We have artists, from all around the world. Alex, who did Mutant Cats, lives in Mexico, I believe. Um, Kyle, who did Chupacabra, lives in Chicago. Um, a book called Aeon that will be coming out next year. Lorenza, she lives in Italy. We're totally a global company from that standpoint. I would say our only um, mandate is how weird, unique, and singular is your art. We're not looking to create. Our house style is that if you see the most unique art with an interesting story, it's a Gungnir book.
Hmm.
Okay.
I like
I
that.
also just realized which mug I was drinking coffee out of. I apologize to all your fans.
It's all right. It is perfectly fine because it's not saying anything to them. But honestly, if you're not picking up a Gungnir book, maybe that's a little message that needs to kind of go that way with it. I like. Feel free to use that with that. And
That's great.
speaking of Gungnir books, Chupacabra. Let us dive into that one because that was one of the first that jumped out to me just seeing a few of the pages on it.
Yeah. It's been, I guess, a 2.5 year journey on that story. My buddy Eric, who at the time ran a studio called Exile Content Studio, which is a Latin American leaning film studio, and I were having lunch one day, and he was like, "Pitch me an idea," and I was like, "I really love Wednesday and Addams Family, and I really love Sabrina: The Chilling Adventures." And I think that we can do a YA female driven story about chupacabras and have social commentary on the billionaire class in it. And he bought it in the moment and said, let's make it. And so I wrote the script for it. And then I was looking for an artist that I felt, from the beginning, the idea was the story itself is going to be pretty dark. And I want to juxtapose that with some really poppy art,
Yeah.
so that when the chupacabra is doing something vicious, it's sort of like comical looking because I just think that's hilarious. My buddy Johnny Handler, who's one of my partners on our company Hero Projects that does the custom comic books with the NFL and Rolling Loud and things like that, came across this profile called Goons and Goblins, Kyle Fenrich, on Instagram, and I reached out and I was like, Kyle, here's the pitch, here's the story. I'd love to bring you in to draw this, and it was sort of like a match made in heaven. We instantly connected on it, and I just have nothing but glowing things to say about Kyle. We're starting to outline what book 2 would look like. And he just brings this really weird and wild sensibility to the world.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely pops off. Like I say, when you see the pages on this, it is one that stands up, especially with the story behind it too. Because, like I say, about Chilling Conspiracy with legendary creatures in the shadows of a small town, like the setup is very, I want to say it's simplistic, but once you start diving into the story, like that's where it kind of really starts picking up, and that's where it really sinks its teeth into. And like I say, for coming out the gate too, that's one that really stands out, and especially for you writing. What do you really think makes up for a great thriller story?
Good, everybody always says that it's character first, and I'm obviously you have to have great characters. I'm really anti the phrase character first or character driven, because to me it's sort of like, can I curse a little?
Yeah.
What's the it's like no fucking shit.
Yeah.
Like that's the price of entry of a good story, is that you have to have a compelling character. And I think when you think in the sense of character first, that sort of insinuates that the setting that you put them in is less important. Whereas I come in from the position that if you don't have a great character, that you're not at the table. So let's create an interesting world that then you set great characters in. So I think that's something with Chupacabra that's really interesting. Is, to your point, it has a very familiar construct.
Mhm.
But when you get into the actual setting of where this takes place and what the twists and turns are, there, it's really unique to this world. And then that allows Alessandra, our main character to make decisions that surprise you, because the decisions are driven by the forces of the world rather than driven by her mentality, right? Her mentality needs to drive the decision that is brought to her because of pressure from the world, not the other way around. So you have to create the pressure in the world to then let the demeanor of that character react to it, not the other way around. And that's sort of how we create this tinderbox within Chupacabra, where the world is closing in on her, and that sort of allows her personality and characteristics to emerge and make decisions based on that.
Absolutely. Like I say, it's one that I think when fans really start getting word of mouth about it, I think they're really gonna be jumping on that, because that is one that stands out. I know there's another one that is jumping out to Tom, if you know him well, so I'll let him take this one.
Like, everybody knows if there's a particular comic that has to do with animals, I'm the one that's in on it. So Mutant Cats, my first jump right off of it is like, who the heck made feline garbage pail kids? Okay. Like I get that. Right, like I'm getting Garbage Pail Kids, Mad Balls, all kind of mixed in. Like my '80s child is going off, and I mean that in the kindest way possible.
That's really funny.
You know, what's it like, you know, with the bizarre accident that turns these feline scientists into unlikely heroes, but you mix it in with dark humor, you know, and it's such a vast difference. How hard was it or fun was it to take this beautifully light and stunning and bright colored, you know, book, and then write all this dark humor on top of it?
That was a lot of fun. Morgan Rosenblum, who I co-wrote it with, and he and I have written a handful of books together. This is sort of the first real comedy of any sort that we wrote, and we had a lot of fun with the dark humor. The way that we think about it was that we actually think it's more like, even though I think your analogies are spot on, that's what I was cracking up. We were always from the point of view that was like the Office and the IT crowd, but with cats that are mutant, right? Yeah. But I like your analogies better. But from that perspective, you know, it was just this office place drama that we were like, okay, 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. Every time they try to do something productive, we need to create a moment that just blows up in their face, right? And there's like that famous Sean Parker and Matt Stone thing about like, it's not this and that, it's this, therefore that. And we were sort of, that's just like, I mean, masterclass of storytelling, but that's how we took it. It was like dark humor, push the story forward, blow everything up in the middle, and add really dark entendres across the whole story. And, you know, like that sort of formula played throughout the book. And, you know, I think it's hilarious.
Now, the question is, have you tried turning it off and turning it back on again? Is there a Noah Fielding type character in there, you know, just hanging out as a vampire in the room next door?
There's a couple of characters that come in at opportune moments that are definitely Lebowski-esque in that sense.
Yes. Nice.
The dude abides. What can I say?
Oh my God. Yeah. Anytime you can get a dude reference in there, I'm all in about that.
Exactly.
So with everything going on with the you know, complete idea of the diversity that you want to bring out with Gungnir, what do you think is now the biggest draw in, you know, the comic literature scene about, you know, telling more sci-fi and fantasy and getting away from everything that's spandex clad?
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't necessarily know if it's getting away from, you know, the capes. I think it's more expanding. You know, the capes have, you know, I think last year in the Diamond Report, it's like have like 71% of the market, right? Is DC and Marvel. So it's to me not necessarily like getting away from those, but educating readers, the way that I always like to say it is, there's about 600,000 people across 5 days that go to San Diego Comic-Con every year. And there's probably close to 1 to 2 million that are just in San Diego going to events, even if they don't cross through the con doors. And there's not even a fraction of that amount of people that go to comic book shops on Wednesdays. So there's clearly a delta of people who love this world, but might have preconceived notions of what the physical books are versus the collectibles versus films versus all of the other sides. So I think it's less about transferring people away from capes and more about opening up people who might just read prose thrillers and be like, hey, there's also graphic novel thrillers that have nothing to do with capes that you might be interested in too. And just sort of expanding that horizon, because I think the one thing that our society does really well is create isolated sandboxes of things and create terminology and create echo chambers that are not necessarily true for how things actually operate. And you have to spend a lot of time to educate around that, and I think there's a huge opportunity within graphic novels to expand the reader base by expanding the reader base.
Yeah, because well, you think about it with the pop culture audience, like that's how we always refer to when you have something that grew organically out of the comic shops and there's the comic fans that go see it, and then all of a sudden the pop culture audience gets into it. And it's like how
Exactly.
perceive it is just trying to meld the two worlds together. And like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the fact is the effort is there to get them in the shops, because you might think but you really don't. And then
Exactly.
once you get in the stores and you pick up a book, it's like, whoa, it's a whole new world, instead of whatever they think they see on TV or film kind of trying to portray it. Because there's nothing like going into a shop on a Wednesday. There's nothing like going to a con and having that interaction with fellow fans that side of the fandom just doesn't have. But I like how you put it with the isolated sandboxes, because that is so true, that everybody kind of stays in their niche unless something is really grown out of the sandbox that they can't avoid. And like once you have that, that's the big win.
100%. Sorry, real quick, I was just going to build on that. As I was saying earlier, one of my formative books was A History of Violence. I would say 97% of people who've seen the movie don't even know it came from a graphic novel.
Right.
They would have no idea. And I think that's like a perfect example of the types of graphic novels that exist and the types of adaptations of those that create a broader audience than people who just like capes, that if you can create that bridge, creates a whole new opportunity around graphic novels and the community that can be built around it.
Absolutely.
I can absolutely agree with that, because, working with Ken as I have, I very much was, I'm the pop culture connoisseur, but there are times where I sandbox myself. It's like, okay, well, Tom knows this, Tom knows that. And then he throws me a curveball. And next thing you know, I'm hooked. Like who's
Feral comes right to mind.
Okay, well, Feral, absolutely, because it's a cat book. It's supposed to be this, but what they're putting out is completely different. It's a zombie book, or Grandma Chainsaw, or so on and so forth.
Or Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. That was probably the best reaction.
You go to hell.
There's a great story behind that.
It is a good one.
Yeah.
Another one, Someone's Killing the Children, right? That's another great one that has nothing to do with capes.
Yeah. That's one that is now going to be the next, in my opinion, the next big thing to cross over when they're still doing the Netflix show. Like once that culture, that's hopefully going to bring more people into the shops. And especially if the stories are there for everybody to get into, it's almost like, if you like this, you should try that. And I think a lot of what Gungnir is doing is going to be doing that. Especially
100%.
Yeah, because especially with the crossover appeal you have, because I know one book that was really jumping out is Hero Quest with Steve Aoki. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and the relationship between music and comics? I know we touched upon it a little earlier, but like when somebody says that to you, what's your instant reaction?
Yeah, I've always had a really strong relationship between music and comics. Obviously, heavy metal had, we did the Megadeth book, we did we did an Iron Maiden book. But what a lot of people probably don't know is that my connection to music and comics comes way before my time at heavy metal. Even is in the late teens, Hero Projects, this company that started with Morgan, Johnny, and my buddy Pete, who's an artist that goes by Voodoo Bones. We made custom comic books for musicians and then animated those comic books as motion comics for their music videos. And we had done that for Shaggy, for 311. We did that for the Rolling Loud Music Festival, and a handful of others. And there's this beautiful bridge between visual storytelling and music, where that paradigm of art talks to each other in a way that I think a lot of people underappreciate. And whether it's the artists on the graphic side being enamored with the musicians, or the musicians being enamored with how these artists can interpretate the story and bring them to life with the art, there's this beautiful mutual respect and admiration that allows for these awesome projects to sort of come to life. And I think Steve is sort of at the nexus of that. And we had, an amazing time with Hero Quest, and he's taken it so much further. We just had the privilege of publishing that first Hero Quest. He's turned it into a board game or a card game, and he's had all these collecticons with it, and doing an amazing work around that. And some of the custom boxes that they've created outside of it, amazing. We're privileged that we had the idea to sort of like add this really cool foil cover. So if you've bought them in the comic stores like Golden Apple, if you're in LA or other places, the cover treatment was our sort of idea to make the lasers feel like they're really coming out of the eyes.
Nice.
But he is, you got to have lasers out of the eyes.
Yes.
You may take the capes out of the stories, but you can't take the stories out of the capes,
Can I get that on a shirt?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that story of Hero and Hyro that Steve sort of came with in his crazy fun mind has been really fun to see how that sort of evolved and bridged the gap even more. He owns a trading card store in downtown LA. He's really been at this nexus of collectability, graphic storytelling, and music for a while.
That's amazing. And
I just gotta wonder, what is the playlist that's the secret office playlist that Steve's cultivated for when you guys are writing? There's got to be one somewhere.
Yeah, he's big into Japanese anime and a lot of the music that is akin to the Voltron era and Power Rangers, and all of that stuff is a lot of the music that we listen to. Anime is obviously a huge influence on those stories.
Yeah. I mean, but it goes to show about what you're doing at the imprint too, that it's not just one genre. It's such a wide net that there's literally something for everybody there.
That something for everyone is a great phrase, because I always like to say, the problem with the term, and for fans that have never heard the term four quadrant, it's a term used in entertainment a lot. It basically means that it's for men and women of all ages and all these things. And four quadrant is like sort of a colloquial term that means that this film is made for everyone. And I'm a firm believer that if a piece of art is made for everyone, it's made for no one. But that does not mean that the institution, the publisher or the studio, the entertainment company shouldn't have something for everyone. So we're big believers that not every story is for everyone, but at Gungnir, there will be a story for everyone. And I think that's a really important distinction, because, you make stories that are story driven, and you try to balance the ideologies of them and the questions that are being asked. But that doesn't mean that every story is going to be appropriate from an age standpoint and like a violence, or from an ideological standpoint. But we try to think about that in the green lighting of stories, that if you came to, like, if we had our own bookstore and you walked in, could every single person who walks this earth find something that they would relate to? And that's sort of how we think about it.
That's awesome.
So, we're halfway through 2025. What is ready to come out? What is the pipeline coming for the rest of 2025 from Gungnir?
Yeah,
I mean,
we
what's at the tip of the staff? Like, what are we putting out there?
we have this amazing book called Last Breeds that'll be coming out this summer. Last Breeds, a story by myself, Jonathan Ball, and a guy named Gregory. Jonathan wrote it. Gregory art directed it. And Lyndon, I'm blanking on his first name. I'm so sorry, brother. Drew it, and it is unbelievable because the whole book itself is duochromatic, and it's all blues and it's all greens and reds, and it is the wildest looking book you have ever seen. Post-apocalyptic, just incredible. Sorry, Scott Henderson did the art. Lyndon was our letterer. Sorry, guys. And I was just on a call with him today because we just approved the shipment of the books. But here, as you can see, the art is duochromatic.
Oh, nice.
Ooh.
Yeah, so the whole book is this duochromatic style, and the story is, you know, after an apocalypse that occurred because this company Gencor used GMOs in all the food, and now kids can't live past the age of 16 because their DNA degrades. A 16-year-old girl shows up at this guy Bale's house, and she shouldn't exist. She shouldn't be allowed to live. And Bale is basically Tarzan. His parents were the ones that owned Gencor, and he never ate any of this food. He never fed it to any of his exotic animals that he raised. And now he has to take this girl from Texas to the last lab in San Diego by foot with a herd of exotic animals, lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my! In this desolate sort of Mad Max-esque world, and a lot of violence, a lot of craziness, and it's the story of survival, and it's really, really dope. And we're really thankful. As the promotion starts coming out, we'll share more of it. But Scott Snyder has been a huge advocate. He gave us an amazing quote that's on the back of the book, and we've been able to be fortunate enough to get him to do a lot of help in sort of raising awareness as we start to roll out the marketing for that this summer.
That's awesome. Scott's amazing. We've had him on the show many times, and I mean,
He's the best.
yeah,
Yes.
I was gonna say, you talk about a co-sign. If he's signing off on it, that's one voice that definitely everybody should be listening to, along with the fans. Because trust me when I say this, folks, wherever you're watching this on YouTube or listening on the podcast form, Gungnir is going to be making some noise in 2025 and beyond, and they're just getting started. This is an imprint you want to get in at the ground level. So you want to make sure that you're following Matthew Medney, who is liner notes in the podcast form. You can follow him and also follow Gungnir Books, because this is going to be the imprint you want to talk about, because literally there is something for everyone, and there is no way you can duck the quality that they're doing, because they're really pushing the real creative side of comics. And that's one thing that really jumps out to me as a reader. I'm excited to jump in on more books from them. Matt, we can't say thank you enough for coming on the show. We definitely have to talk to you again about this.
I appreciate it, guys. I really appreciate the time and letting me preach to your audience. Hopefully they like what they heard, and they'll give us a shot on one of the stories, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. And we'll end it like we always do here on Turn a Page. So on behalf of Tom and myself, when you're at the comic shops and you have a great issue in your hand that's literally just from Gungnir Entertainment, and you see somebody struggling to find something, hand them a copy. Tell them turn a page. We'll see you next time.
I'm out.